Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Fighting for Five, episode 12, where we go over the document number 13, brought to you by Couch Potato Brand Snack Foods and Beverages. All right, so this problem, which I believe is 2012, let me double check, 2012, question 3. Pretty straightforward. We're given two household size distributions. So this is, since we're looking at a histogram, this is obviously quantitative data. Household size with units being number of people, that's definitely quantitative data. Part A asks us to compare the distributions of household size in the metropolitan area for these two different years. Now, of course, anytime you're talking about quantitative distributions and describing quantitative distributions, you want to touch upon center, spread, shape, and unusual features. The unusual features portion, if there are unusual features, then definitely mention them. If there are not, then there's no need to mention them. Looking at these two distributions of household size, nothing too unusual. Yes, there's a skew, but that's not unusual. Unusual means there are gaps in the data. We don't see that here. So if you don't mention unusual features in this case, it's fine. You'll also notice that in the scoring guidelines, the way they score it for part A is essentially correct if the response correctly compares the center for both distributions. So they're not actually looking into shape or spread. However, that is just what they did this particular year. In following years or in previous years, they may have only looked at shape or spread, or all three, or all four. So what the thing is, you have to go in with the mindset that anytime you're asked to describe a distribution of quantitative data, you want to touch upon all 3 or 4 aspects. All right. Doesn't matter what they're going to be interested in. They will definitely be interested in one or all of those aspects. So make sure that you are naming and referring to all of those aspects. So since there are 2 distributions here, we do have to use compare words like less than, greater than. And so let's see what we have here. So for center, I said household sizes in 1950 had a larger mean than in 2000. And you can see just by looking at the histograms that there's a mean maybe around here. This is an approximation in 1950. And maybe in 2000, the mean is somewhere around there. Since we don't have the exact values, and since it's really not reasonable to plug in all of this information into your calculator to find exact values, we are okay with approximating. So I said household sizes in 1950 had a larger mean. So there's that compare word. Than in 2000. And I said, I made it clear that I'm approximating here. So approximately 4.5, I should say, people in 1950 versus approximately 3.5 people in 2000. All right, so there's context there, there are compare words, and we are citing specific evidence. Even if it is approximate evidence, it is still evidence that we are taking from the distributions. All right, so that's center. Spread. Again, they didn't grade the spread aspect, but it's still important that you know how to do this properly. So a proper description of spread would be something along these lines. Household sizes in 1950 had a larger variability than in 2000 when looking at the range. So we do have skewed distributions here. So ideally, I'd love to see the IQR, but it's difficult to approximate the IQR when you're looking at histograms and you don't have the exact specific details of the data. So I just went with range. And with range, we can clearly see that in 1950, the max household size was 14 people. The min household size was 1 person. And so the range would be 13 people. And that's not an approximation, right? That is an exact value. So I don't have to say approximately. In fact, it would be not really correct to say approximately. All right, so again, we have context, we have compare words, and then we have our specific evidence. All right, so make sure that you're always doing that specific evidence. And for shape, I just said that both distributions of household sizes are unimodal. So when we're discussing shape, we have to touch upon modality and then also skew or symmetry, if whichever one it is. So I said unimodal and skewed right. And they're both of their shapes are pretty much like that. All right. And again, no unusual features, so I didn't bother mentioning unusual features. And that would be it for part A. Pretty quick. Part B, the researcher is going to construct a confidence interval, and it goes on to ask you to simply state the conditions for a two-sample T procedure and explain if they're met. All right, so the conditions are, of course, when we're running a T procedure, first of all, random/representative samples. And if you go up to the question, the opening of the question, the very first few words say independent random samples of 500 households were taken. So I'm quoting specific evidence from the description of the problem. Independent random samples were mentioned. All right, and there you have it. The random representative sample condition is met. The second condition is the 10% condition. So is 500 less than 10% of households in a large metropolitan area? I believe it's pretty safe to say that this is the case. I think the key word that they give us is large. So if we see that word, we're assuming something that's, well, huge. And so our sample size of 500 is going to be less than 10% of the overall number of households in the entire population, which is metropolitan areas. I just want to point out the scoring guideline and how they mention the 10% condition. They say, we're looking here at number 3 that I just highlighted. They are talking about the 10% condition in this way. They say the population sizes are at least 10 or 20 times the sample sizes. If you think about it, that's just another way of saying, are the sample sizes at most 10% of the population size, right? So they're equivalent statements. So part 3 is just referring to the 10% condition. I listed it here as 2. It doesn't matter what order. And then the third condition, of course, is what we call the nearly normal condition. Now, there are 2 checks for this. First of all, if n is greater than 30, then the nearly normal condition is automatically met and you're done. You don't have to do anything else. If n is less than 30, then you need to check that the sample itself is nearly normal by checking the normal probability plot. All right. And in this case, of course, sample size is 500. So I mentioned since n is equal to 500 for both samples, they both qualify for the nearly normal condition. And it's not a bad idea to say, since n is equal to 500 households. Again, anytime you can sort of throw in some context into the mix, it's a good thing. Also, we are checking these conditions for both samples, so try to include language that refers to the fact that you're checking conditions for both samples. All right, and there we have it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was hopefully a quick video. If you have any questions, let me know. I will come back with another video doing the next problem very soon. Take care.